Well, the two major party candidates for vice president met for their only debate on Tuesday. Democrat Tim Walz and Republican J.D. Vance had a polite and civil exchange, despite the fact that they have strongly attacked each other on the campaign trail. Walz had a hard time explaining why he had previously and wrongly said he was in Tiananmen Square, China, during the pro-democracy protests in 1989.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this is I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests, went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
The sharpest moment came near the end when Vance refused to answer a question about whether Donald Trump had lost the 2020 election.
January 6th was not Facebook ads. This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen. And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's inability to say. He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
And related to the 2020 election, this week a federal judge in Washington unsealed the special counsel's court filing, which says Donald Trump knowingly pushed false claims of voter fraud before January 6th and resorted to crimes in his failed bid to cling to power. So, Jennifer, I'm wondering, about the Trump administration and Vance still really not ready to concede the 2020 election. What's your take on that?
It sounds like it's still going to be one of their tactics, one of their strategies, something that they're not going to admit to because, well, I mean, how many court cases are on the line over this? Admitting that would kind of be admitting defeat. And I don't see it happening. I don't see them coming around. I don't see them coming to the point of being honest brokers. They haven't been thus far. And I don't see it changing anytime soon.
Jeff, President Trump says that the results of the 2020 election were fraudulent, and he maintains that position, really hasn't backed down.
Look, I think anybody who watched that debate realized J.D. Vance was right on the policy. He was leading on the discussion, and really, I think Tim Walz was kind of out of his league on going against J.D. Vance in that conversation. But I think, I think the fascinating thing in the conversations I've seen since is that both parties wish everybody would flip the ticket and let the vice presidents lead the ticket on either side. So I think there's been a really interesting dynamic that's played out here just since this debate, where people are getting a lot more focused on the election. They're getting a lot more focused on the policies, and we're still waiting to see from the Democrats what policies they're willing to put forward to end some of the struggles that Floridians and Americans are seeing today.
Yeah. Kimberly, some polls show the race in Florida is tightening up, whether you look at the U.S. Senate race or if you look at the presidential race. Kamala Harris is getting a little bit closer in Florida to Donald Trump, and Debbie McCarcel-Powell is getting a little bit closer to Rick Scott in the U.S. Senate race. When we talk about issues like the 2020 election, does that have any difference on those uncommitted voters, do you think?
I don't know that it's so much that. I mean, for Rick Scott especially, too, we've seen him so active on the ground in Florida ever since the storm hit. That's a lot of earned media, to have the candidate there. He's also our senator, obviously, but to have him there on the ground, showing him helping other people and so forth. I just think in the middle of a crisis like that, and in our state, that's where people are really focused. And so that makes a huge difference. I do think there's been a lot of energy for Democrats ever since Vice President Harris rose to the top of the ticket. I mean, I attended a watch party during every debate. I attend a watch party. I sort of go back and forth between Republicans and Democrats to chart the energy and get a sense of, how people are reacting to the different things that the candidates are saying. And there was so much more energy when I attended this week with the vice presidential debate. I went to a Democratic watch party versus in June with the Biden debate, where it was very glum and depressing. And, there was kind of no way for them to spin it and to talk about that. So there has been a shift. I think that probably it will be more narrow than it would have been, but it's still difficult for me to see Harris winning Florida, but I could see a narrower margin potentially. And again, I don't think that the Harris campaign thinks that they will win Florida, because otherwise they would be here. They would be spending more money here. There's a lot of electoral votes up for grabs, more than some of these other battleground states combined, if you were to do well in Florida. But they're not here on the ground. And so that to me is the biggest tell.
Yeah. Trabell, I want to ask you about something that J.D. Vance said during the debate this week. He said that he's in support of expelling 20 to 25 million undocumented immigrants. We know we have a lot of undocumented immigrants in Florida. How do you think that plays out here in Florida? Because we have a wide group of people that have come here without documents, of various ethnic groups from various countries. How do you think that plays out?
Well, it's to be seen. As just mentioned, the projections here and a lot of Republican support. It's speaking to an audience, despite the population of having more immigrants and those here that would, you would think, but the policy and politics of it all. What Vance did on his debate, he presented a lot of his style, which is more measured, calm. There was a lot of pleasantries going along between both candidates, and while still projecting through some of those hard right policy measures. And we'll see how. We won't know until the election day how it all goes down, similar to what we thought going into the President Trump ascension, where we all thought, Hillary was going to get it, at least many of the pundits, and then there was a big surprise. So it's to be seen.
Jennifer, were you surprised during the debate when Vance said that President Trump had saved the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, because Florida leads the nation in ACA enrollment? Were you surprised that Vance took that stand?
Yes, I was very surprised about that. I was surprised when he talked about his personal family members getting personal or private insurance, and all I could think of was, can you go back in time and see how all of this started into 2010 and know where this started and how much work went into this and how, what the ACA's opened up. And I love that they talked about how the Republicans called it Obamacare, and we embraced that. Yeah, we embraced that, absolutely. It was a massive project. It was decades, really, in the making, and it has been a benefit to our country, unlike anything I think we've seen since probably Roosevelt.
Jeff, we just have 10 seconds. President Trump didn't really save the ACA, but is the ACA now popular among Republicans?
I don't think it's specifically popular amongst Republicans. I think, look, the big challenge the U.S. faces now is the debt crisis. And neither party, I think, is doing enough to talk about how we're going to handle the massive amount of debt with the large Democratic entitlements that we've seen over the last few years. That's the big challenge that the next president's going to face.